Hi, my name is Victor, and today I want to show you how to use Nx to scale your React development. There are two aspects of scaling that I'm going to cover. The first one is tech, right? How to make it fast. As you put more code in the same repository, as your application grows, or you have a lot of applications in the same place sharing code, how can you make sure that it's fast? You can build everything fast, test it fast, etc. The second aspect of scaling is org scaling. As you have more and more people, often from different teams or even orgs, contributing to the same repo, the same app or the same platform or even to different platforms, how can you make sure that they can work effectively? That they know what to run, that they know when they send a PR, that they aren't breaking anyone, etc. Right? Both of those are very important. So Nx is a set of extensible dev tools for monorepos that I've been using and I've been working on for many years, and it's been used by a lot of large companies to drive their development. Okay. As I'm going through this video and I'm showing you how to use Nx to enable a few things, I want you to pay attention to two things. Right. The first one is that Nx has a mighty general purpose metadata driven CLI with editor support. Right. So when I show you how the CLI works, please pay attention and sort of compare it with the CLIs you know and say, okay, how is it better? In what way is it better? How can you use this very mighty CLI to improve your dev experience? And the second aspect is sort of monorepo features. And things like distributed computation memorization or distributed computation caching, right? It's a big deal, and very few tools have it, right? Code change analysis, again, it's a very big deal and very few tools have it. So once I show you those, think, okay, I know how that works now. How does it compare to tools like Learn or Yarn workspaces, right? Because those are often used to implement some monorepo-like setups, right? In what way is it better, etc. Okay. Okay, let's get started. To create a new Nx workspace, I just need to type npx create Nx workspace. I'm going to use the next version, but you don't have to. I can select a preset as well. In this case, it's a React demo, so I'm going to select the React preset. And once this is done, it will ask me a few questions about my new workspace. One of them is the org name or workspace name. So it's different from the application name. Because Nx is a monorepo tool, meaning that it assumes that you're building multiple things in the same place, you name your workspace not as your application, but usually as your team or org or even company. In this case, let's say we're working at Happy Org. And because I select a preset, it can create an application for me. Again, it's a monorepo tool, so you can always create applications later using different technologies, etc. For now, though, let's assume we're building some sort of shop application. Okay, we are done. A note it pointed out this tutorial you can go to and work through. It's an interactive tutorial, so if you have 10 minutes to spend, please do it, and you will sort of see how Nx is easy to use after going through that. The second thing is it points you to a free Nx course on YouTube you can go and watch. It covers sort of the same things I'm going to cover in this video, just from a different angle. All right, so this is our workspace. There are a few things I want to point out in this workspace, okay? Firstly, there are two folders that are interesting where most of the code of the workspace will live: the apps and the libs. The apps folder is where Nx stores things that are runnable, things that we can execute. For example, web apps running in a browser, or node applications running somewhere else on the server. And the libs folder is where we store packages that aren't runnable, but sort of just chunks of code with well-defined public API that we can test, build, lint, and maybe publish and compose into other packages and compose into apps. Okay, so if you think about it as sort of binaries and libraries or DLLs, that's a distinction. The distinction is important because it allows us to actually structure our application in a very interesting way, and I will show you a little bit in a second. Okay, so if we look at the apps folders, there are two apps right now that have been created by the command, by the React preset: the shop app, right, and the shop end-to-end app. The shop app just has some React app, right? And the end-to-end app is a node app that has a suite of Cypress end-to-end tests for this app, right? You don't have to use Cypress to test your React app. All of this stuff is just, created by this preset, which is good for demos. If you craft your own setup for your own organization, you can do whatever you want, okay? Lastly, there is a file, a global configuration file called workspace.json, which is interesting to look at. This file basically configures what projects are what tells Nx what projects are in the current workspace and what you can do with them. Okay, the architect section of the configuration basically tells the types of targets, the types of verbs, types of actions we can do to each project, and provide the recipe of how this action performs, like load this function, pass this options kind of situation. Okay, so let's start and let's try to do something interesting. Let's run the suite of end-to-end tests for my shop app, right? I'm going to do this -- watch, right? So normally folks, when they develop, they serve the app using the Webpack, and then they poke at it, right? And they see the Webpack reflecting the changes. And once they're happy, they author an end-to-end test. I used to do it the same way, but now with Cypress being so mighty and so easy to use, I switched to using Cypress, where I actually author my end-to-end test and I keep it running while I'm working on my application, right? So I actually do more of a legit TDD lately because of how much better the Cypress setup is and the Nx setup with Cypress is to enable this type of development. Okay, in this case I have a test. It's a hello world app, so it doesn't check anything, right? Okay, so if I kill this command, I want to show you a few things. Okay, so when I typed in this command to invoke my end-to-end tests, I had to remember I had to know a few things. Firstly, I have this project. This is quite easy. I mean, I can see the project, right? That it has a target. You know, I can see the target in the configuration file, right? And this watch option. So I have to know about a few things, right? And if I have a small app and I have a small team, we all can remember things, right, really well. But if I have a larger workspace with many apps and many teams, and they want to contribute to each other's stuff, that can become a problem, right? We need to be able to tell folks what they can do to each project and how they can do it, right? So I could do something like passing -- help, so that works. And if I do -- help, Nx is going to look at the Cypress function, right? Find a metadata file next to it, and will construct this help description for me, right? So I can read it and maybe figure out what to pass. This works, but it's sort of not very accessible to a lot of developers who may not be as good at using the terminal as some other people are, right? So another thing Nx can do is it can use this metadata to give you a richer experience for invoking commands, right? And to do that, you need to install a VS Code extension called Nx console. The VS Code extension that when you install it, right, will show you something like this, right? And shows you a list of projects with all its targets, some common commands, and the things you can do. You can click on those things with your mouse, and I tend to not use my mouse, right? I simply open the command palette and type in Nx end-to-end. If I select the UI option and I select my project, I'm going to see a form that is created using the metadata. This is not a hard-coded form, right? If you have your own plugin that doesn't use Cypress, you're going to see a different form in here, right? So I'm going to see this form that I can use to figure out what is available, to play with different flags, and once I'm happy, I can click on run, and the command will run. Most often than not, though, I'm actually doing it without the UI, just like this. And in here, I can construct this command using the command palette. I can say, oh, I want to watch stuff, right? And once I'm happy with the command I'm constructing over here, I can execute it. And as you can see, it's simply running this command, right? And it's going to launch Cypress just as before. And I can continue with my development. The important thing here to note is that the VS Code experience we saw, this rich editor experience, is nothing like old school Visual Studio experience, right? Here, this experience is not divorced from the terminal, right? It just helps me to use my CLI a bit more effectively. It actually prints what it's doing such that I can like do it by hand if I want to, right? So it's actually, you don't pay the cost of having two completely separate experiences. This is just some guidance for folks who may not be as familiar with a particular project they're trying to run, or even when I'm familiar, it's just faster sometimes to construct this command using the command palette instead of typing the command in the terminal, okay? Okay, so I have that. Let's actually author my end-to-end test right now. Right? If I go to the apps, end-to-end test, and I open my end-to-end test over here, I'm going to replace it with have a snippet created so we don't have to waste a lot of time watching me type. And this test, essentially what it does, it's going to add an item to a shopping cart, right? And verify that there is an item in the shopping cart. It's not the greatest of tests, right? So don't think this is how I write my end-to-end test, but it illustrates the point. Okay. Next, I'm going to go open a support page object, and I'm going to generate the page object helpers for me in here, right? As you can see, I have everything ready. I can check in my test right now that it's failing, right? It's trying to click on the button to add a blanket, but there is no button because we didn't implement anything yet, okay? That's good. I'll go back to my application. Now I can open my application. As you can see, there is a main file in here that we serve, and it opens the app, right? This guy. Right now, this is just the hello world stuff, which I don't care to preserve. So I'm going to insert the, oh shoot, wrong thing. I'm going to insert the simple implementation of this app, right? What this implementation is going to do, it's going to take a bunch of items, a weighted blanket. I highly recommend people to have weighted blankets, a soft pillow, and a mattress, right? And it's going to like print all of those items, right? And implement some functionality such that you can click on an item and add it to the cart, okay? There is nothing interesting in here, okay? Again, it's just a demo that I will use to illustrate a few points. So let me add a few styles so it doesn't look super ugly, okay? So if I go back right now, and if I refresh, I will see that my application is working, right? I was able to, if I can zoom in, to build an app where I can add, add items to my shopping cart. Nothing really interesting going on here. And if you haven't used Cypress before, it's important to know that this part is actually interactive. I can, first of all, step through the whole test and see what's going on. I can, do things to it, right? So Cypress actually is a fantastic way to do the development because it allows you to do, basically, it allows you to serve your app in a very structured way, right? So that's how I usually do it. So I have my test right now and my app running. Let me show you one thing which I think is pretty cool. Before I go any further, is that let's build the app now. So if I want to build the app, I can type Nx build shop, and let's say if I want to do it in production way, in dash prot, we'll do minification tree shaking. If I run this command right now, what Nx is going to do, it's going to basically delegate to Webpack. It's going to, and the reason why, because this builder uses Webpack. If you don't use Webpack, use something else, feel free to change it. Nx actually doesn't care which tool you use to interact with your code base. It's just a task coordinator. Okay, this plugin happened to be using Webpack. Okay, so it built 2 copies of the application, 1 copy for newer browsers, 1 copy for older browsers, and it's going to set up the loading such that the older browsers are going to get the bigger bundle. Okay, the important thing, however, is that I ran this command and it took some time. I don't know, 20 seconds, something like that, right? And this is a very small app. For a very large app, we're talking about many minutes to be able to build it. However, if I run the same command again, the result will be instant. And the reason why it will be instant, because Nx does what's called computation caching, right? Nx, when I run any command, I do anything to Nx. I don't have to do build, and I will show you in a second. When I do anything to any project in Nx, it's going to look at the source code of that project and any other project that is associated or the project depends on, right? It's going to look at basically a subset of the source code of the repo. It's going to look at the environment that you're running in, like version of node and stuff. It's going to look at what you're trying to do exactly, what flags and stuff you're passing. It's going to combine these source code inputs, runtime inputs, these sort of flags, right, into one computation key, such that if it finds the same computation already available on this machine, it's going to, instead of actually running the build in this case, it's going to replay the build. So it's going to replay the terminal output in a way that it was recorded before. So this is the terminal output we see that was recorded the first time we ran this command. And it's going to put the files that would have been created by this boot operation in the place where they should be. Okay, so for you, you probably won't even know or won't even care whether things are cached or not, because the result will be the same. It's just the cached version will be a lot faster. In this case, the result is instant. Okay, and we're going to see why it is important even more so, because what Nx allows you to do is it allows you to share this cache with your teammates or with your whole organization, which means that your whole organization, in your whole org, you will never have to rebuild or retest anything twice. Okay. All right, what we have right now is already pretty cool. We have 2 applications. One of them is a web app, and the other one is a suite of end-to-end tests, and we can interact with them using the structured CLI. Right? We can run builders, run targets against them. We can do it in terminal. We can ask for some assistance from VS Code. It all works relatively well, right? The beauty of Nx, however, or M1 in general, is that you can partition those apps into lots of packages that you can deal with independently. That's where the strength of a tool like Nx lies, right? So we didn't utilize that capability yet. So let's do that, right? For the shop app, for example, if I open the app itself, there is this component that renders items. I can pull into a separate library, for example, a library of UI components. And I can develop that library independently. Maybe a different team would develop that library, sort of like a design system situation, right? That happens very often. So let's see how we can enable that, right? So I can go in here and click on the generate button, or again invoke generate in the command palette. And in here, I will see all the generators, those schematics that are provided by the current plugins installed in my workspace, okay? If I have more plugins, I will see more stuff in here. If I have my own custom things that I would write for my organization, which every org using Nx does, I will see those things in here as well, right? I care about generating a library, okay? So this is the form I see. Again, none of this is hard-coded. It's all derived from the metadata. So if you author your own generator, you will see the same form, or whatever the form that is targeting your generator, right? That is the cool part about Nx, right? And again, everything you see over here it can be used in the terminal. You don't have to use VS Code to enable that. Let's call this library UI. And as I'm typing, as you can see, Nx is going to show me the command that's running in the terminal. And it's going to show me what would be created if I chose to click on run, right? At no point, nothing has happened to my file system yet. Nx comes with a virtual file system, the Nx CLI, such that you can play with generators before committing to anything, right? You can play around, choose to remove certain things. In here, for example, I can decide to, I actually don't want to have a component. I want to have a version of the library without a component. And once that looks pretty good, looks legitimate, I can commit to it. Right? And if I click on run, right, it's going to create my library right now. And as you can see, it appeared in the libs folder over here. Okay, that's cool. Most often the node, however, I would generate things like components themselves. And say I want to generate a component, and I'll say called item list, and I can select a project where it will be created. If I select shop, it's going to be created in the shop project, but it's not what I want. I actually want it in the UI library, right? It's in the UI. I can again play around with stuff, choose what I, let's say I want to re-export it, so it can be consumed by other libraries. Basically, I want to make it part of the public API, right? I can, play around with some stuff. Let's say this is good enough. And after I'm done, I can click on run. And here you go. This is my component, right? Created in this library that is re-exported right now, right? Note a few things that are important here, that the generators here use virtual file systems so I can play with them, right? That's good. Secondly, they can be used not just to create new artifacts, but to update existing artifacts. You can see we are updating index file over here. And a lot of generators we ship with in our plugins do a lot of interesting stuff with your code base. And you can do those yourself in your own org, right? If you have certain patterns that reappear and over again, it's very easy to automate them, configure them, and let your developers use the same interactive experience to invoke the generators, right? So that's a very important feature. And because the generators are so structured, you tend to promote good patterns across the organization with ease, right? Like copying and pasting works, but it has one downside in that you don't know what is accidental in whatever you're copying, right? Whatever is intentional, whatever is not. When you generate, it's a lot more clear. You have the flags, you tweak them, right? And you see exactly what the author of the pattern intended you to see, right? Okay, so let's open the component. And let's move this component right now from my application, right? So this is my application, this is the same component. I want to move it over here, right? So I'm going to snippet it away because otherwise it's just too long to type. This is my component, right? So now I can remove it over here and use it instead of the items. Item list. Oh shoot, one thing I need to do, I need to import it first, right? So if I go over here, let me reload my TypeScript language first. I can import my library right now without having to configure anything at all, right? I just create my library, no configuration required. And now I can say, I want to import from Happy Org UI, name of the library, and I can import whatever I want in here, in this case, item list. Note this import is not a relative import. And this is very important because relative imports have a lot of problems in that you don't know what you can, it's hard to understand the code base, but also it means that you cannot publish this library anywhere. If you choose to move the library, all the imports have to change. It's basically a very costly operation. In here, I use this full correctly defined import such that if I choose to publish this library to say my Artifactory or npm, my code base doesn't have to change at all. Right? It can remain as is. Right? So in this case, I'm happy with that. I'm going to use my item list, and I need to pass items, which in this case is just a constant of items, and pass the add to cart, which in this case will take code, and it's going to just close that, invoke this guy. All right. So, and I no longer need this object. Right. So this is my refactoring. Right. So instead of having this item list hard-coded in my application, I pulled it out. Right. I moved it into a separate thing, a separate library that can be a design system, for example, and I did it in a minute, right? And it still worked just as well as it did before, right? All right, let's keep going. So one of the things that can be useful if you have a UI library of presentational components or DOM components that a separate team, a design team can be working on, right? And can publish somewhere that the feature teams or application teams can consume, is that you can set up something like Storybook. A Storybook is a way for you to serve this type of components, right, and test them in a way that still uses the browser, but sort of isolated from the rest of the application. It can be very handy. Okay, so let's set it up using Nx. So once again, I'm going to invoke a generator, and we happen to have a Storybook configuration for React. But you know, if you use something else, again, very similarly, you can build your own stuff, right? Storybook configuration. And I just need to select my library, which is UI, and select a few flags. And once I'm happy with what I see, let's say I'm happy, I can click on run. And it will install a few packages that are required for me. And once those packages are installed, it's all done, right? So I have a few things. I have my stories set up for my component. It's sort of a sketch, still work in progress, right? And I can edit those stories. And I also have a suite of end-to-end tests over here for my stories, which I'm going to look at in a second. Okay. Firstly, let me update the stories such that there is a bit more meaningful stuff going on, right? In this case, I'm simply going to render my item list component with a blanket. Okay. And so the question is, how do I invoke the Storybook stuff, right? So I have it in here. So what do I do with it, right? And this is where the structured nature of the Nx CLI is why it is so powerful. Is that if I open the UI project over here, right? This is a Workspace.json file, the configuration file. As you can see, there is a Storybook target defined now for my library, right? And another one which allows me to build Storybook. What it means is that I can simply invoke an Nx Storybook UI like this, or using the VS Code extension, right? Or just by clicking over here, it's all the same stuff. And what it is going to do, if I simply type this, right? It's going to run my Storybook in a browser, which I can then use to inspect stuff, right? And as before, right, I can ask for help and see what options are available. Everything works in exactly the same way, right? Nothing is hard-coded in the Nx experience. It's all metadata driven, right? Which means that if I run my Storybook right now, in a second, I will see the thing opened on a particular port, right? Okay, this is my thing that I want to, oh shoot. And if I open, say, Chrome, and I go to localhost, 4400. Let's wait for a second. Okay, cool. I can see my storybook running. I mean, this is a very trivial component. There is not much going on, not very interesting, so not the best use case for storybook. But the idea is not to show the storybook per se, but to show you that I have it set up in a way that's quite feels about the same as other operations. Right? I can expand what it means to interact with my project in a way that doesn't break the dev experience. In this case, I can still do an Nx run and select, for example, UI storybook, right? And have a similar form as before. All of those things work very similarly, right? To other operations like build, right? And another thing that's pretty cool, Nx set up the set of end-to-end tests for me using Cypress, such that I can invoke this test and run my tests. I mean, right now this is going to fail, right? But I can still run UI end-to-end, right? And it's going to use Cypress to test my components via Storybook, which I think is probably the best way to test presentational components, because you actually deal with the browser, but you do it in a way that is isolated from the rest of the application. Okay. And well, yeah, it is going to fail. Anyhow. So what we have right now is an application with a single UI library. Now this UI library is like you can share it with other applications or other feature teams. That's cool. But what Nx users tend to do is not just create libraries for share, right? Create libraries to share code is a good idea, obviously. But you can also create libraries to just structure code better, right? To have well-defined modules that you can think about independently, right? Develop independently, test independently, own independently, and maybe even deploy independently, okay? So in this case, what I'm going to do to illustrate this is I'm going to create two separate libraries. I'm going to create one library called feature main, right? And I would move the main functionality of my shop app into feature main, right? And I'm going to create a second library called feature about. And if I go right now, those are my two feature libraries. So let me move the code from the application to those libraries. All right, so I updated my application right now to include two libraries, the feature main and feature about. As we keep splitting our application into more and more libraries using the router. Now what's important is that the tool, the Nx, is going to have is very basic. If I go to feature main, for example, I will see that the feature main library contains what the application itself used to contain, which is the shopping cart functionality, right? And if I go to the about library contains just, a dummy, hello, this is about feature message, right? So I have it over here. So let me just show you that it keeps working. If I do an Nx serve and I serve my shop app, right? Nx is going to delegate to Webpack to serve the app. And I can see right now that, the app is working, and I can switch between two routes over here, right? Okay. So that's cool. As we're splitting our application more and more libraries, what's important is that Nx is going to look at our code base, at our workspace, and figure out how all of those packages, all of those libraries and applications depend on each other, right? Because if you imagine this libs folder being, I don't know, 100, like having 100 or 200 libs packages in it, which is not unusual. Like hundreds of libs is normal in Nx because they're so easy to create. Managing all of this stuff manually by hand, right, it's just error prone, it's unrealistic, right? So the tool has to do it. So Nx can use this information in several ways. One, it can show it to you. So if you run the debgraph command, right, here, you're going to see something like this, right? So you can examine it, make decisions based on it, include this information to your pull request, the thing is interactive and stuff. Right? That's cool. But another thing Nx can do is it can use information to effectively manage your workspace, right? So imagine, like if you look at our project right now, what we've seen is that our shop app essentially consists out of 4 projects. The shop app itself, but it also imports these 3 libraries to run the app, right? So there are 4 projects, each of which can be built, tested, linked separately, right? So if I want to test my shop app, right? If I run this command, it's only going to test this project, right? The shop project. If I want to test everything the shop app depends on, I just need to add with depths to it. I can also do it in parallel, right? If I want to speed it up, right? So if I run this, what I'm going to see is that Nx is going to, it tells me that it's going to test the project, the shop app, and it's 3 dependencies. I don't have to tell Nx which projects to test. It knows, right? It knows the graph, and it can tell me at the end that all of them were successful. The cool part about this, of course, is that if I rerun it, right, the result will be instant because, you know, everything will be retrieved from cache. And the computation caching, as I mentioned before, is one of the reasons Nx can scale so well, can support much larger repositories that a normal tool would, right? So I have this. Now let me show something that is quite interesting, that if I have this working, so I have everything running, everything is retrieved from cache right now. Let's imagine I changed the about feature and I perform the change. So now if I try to retest the same thing again, what is going to happen is Nx is going to retest several things. It's going to retest the shop and the about feature, but it's going to retrieve information about the other 2 features, which is the main and the UI, from cache, right? This is the result we're seeing over here, that 2 out of 4 projects were retrieved from cache, right? So the tests succeeded. And that's the key part to why Nx gives you a good experience, is that most of the time, if you deal with a real code base, most of your operations can be retrieved from cache. You only deal with a small part of the code base that changes, and that part you have to rebuild and retest and relint. Okay. This is even more important, right? If I introduce another project to the mix, right? Right now there is a single app called shop that consumes 3 libs. But let's imagine, for the sake of argument, there is a second app, right? Called admin. Admin app, right? And if I create the app, actually don't care about the router, I will see it over here. And just to make the example a bit more interesting, I'm going to import I don't know, something from Nrwl happy.org UI library. All right, and I can just say item list. Okay. So now, if I run the same debgraph command, what I'm going to see is that the UI library is consumed by both the shop app indirectly via the feature main library and by the admin app. Okay. So every time I add a project, right, to my workspace, it sort of invalidates the whole cache because it's very hard to reliably know what's going on. But let's say I'm retesting my shop app again, right? I want to make sure that the shop app and the rest of functionality works well. So the thing is retested, you know, that's good. Now, imagine I'm testing my admin app. Again, with dependencies, what is going to happen here is that the admin app is going to be tested, but the UI library depends on it's going to be retrieved from cache, right? And that's the key part of computation caching, is that once you split your applications into those packages that are reusable, the result of computing them, like testing, building, linking them, can be shared across your projects, right? And once you, and I'll show you in a bit, make your cache distributed, so your teammates and your CI can share the same cache with you, right? Most of the time, whatever you do is at least partially computed somewhere else, okay? Okay, so we have that, right? The caching is a big deal, and I highly recommend you to explore it a bit more. The other part of the Nx story that is very important is code change analysis. And the difference between the two, both of them try to do the same thing, which is they try to make your repository perform really well, right? But they do it in 2 different ways. Whereas caching makes sure that nothing ever happens twice, that you only rebuild and retest everything just once. The code change analysis makes sure that whatever you need to rebuild and retest, that list of projects is as small as possible, right? Let me show you. So let's say I have it checked in. So let's say this is this is my project, and let's imagine I want to open a PR, right? So I'm going to create a branch code fix main, right? And I'm going to look at the main feature of my shop application, and I'm going to introduce, I don't know, some change, something silly like that. Okay, so as you can see, this is the only file that has changed, right? If I like computation caching right now wouldn't validate the skin, validate the app, but what I need to know as well is, do I need to rebuild and retest the admin app as well? All right, and I don't want to do it by hand. Again, we're talking about hundreds of projects in a real scenario, right? The tool has to help me do that, right? And Nx does help you, right? And firstly, it can show you what can be affected by your change, right? And if I run the affected dep graph command, I will see the same graph as before. Let me select all. This is my graph, but one part of this graph is highlighted in red, right? So it knows that this part of the graph can be broken. So we have to attend to it if we want to merge our PR, right? So it knows it. But in addition to just knowing it, right, it allows us to retest and rebuild only the parts that are affected. So in this case, if I run the affected test command, which is, you can again type it in the terminal, you don't have to use the UI. It knows that it needs to rebuild and retest only two projects, the feature main and the shop, right? It knows it doesn't even have to worry about other projects, right? Some of them can be cached, some not, it doesn't really matter. These two projects have to be rebuilt and retested. And of course, if I run the same command again, this time, both of those, the same two projects are still affected. That fact hasn't changed, right? My code change, this PR, would affect, you know, the feature main and the shop app, but because I already computed this exact set of tests for both of those, I can retrieve those from the cache. Finally, let me show you how to share your computation cache with your teammates and with your org, or even with the whole community. Okay, to do that, you need to go to nx.app, right? And once you are there, you need to log in and create a workspace or set up a workspace. Give it a name, demo workspace. It will give me instruction on what to run. I'm just going to copy and paste it. And I don't need CI. And okay, cool. Right now, you know, there is nothing to show. And so what I'm going to do right now is to run this command. And this command is going to set up distributed caching for me. All right, so how does distributed caching works? It kind of works similar to no distributed caching, but with the changes you can share the result of your computation with your teammates in your CI. So if I do something like a next build shom dash prod, a lot has changed in this workspace. So there is no cache key that corresponds to this computation against this set of source files, right? So Nx has to actually call Webpack, and Webpack in this case will invoke cursor or whatever. There is a lot of computation going on in here to create two things, to create a set of files, a set of bundle files, and to print this stuff in the terminal, right? So if I look at the this folder, these are the bundles, okay? So it's working, that's great. If I run the command again, you know, it's instant because this time I retrieved it from the local cache. That's great. The problem, of course, is that what if I'm someone else on my team? Susan, who's sitting next to me, wants to use the result of my computation. How can she do it, right? Let's imagine I'm Susan, so I'm just going to delete my local cache, right? So as if I were Susan, right? So at this point, I have nothing stored locally, right? So if I'm Susan right now and I'm building the same shop app, I see that the result appeared instantly, and it tells me that the result for the shop app. So all the files, you know, the terminal output, everything were retrieved from the local cache, from the distributed cache, first to my local cache, such that if I run it one more time, I don't have to go and talk to the remote cache, right? And then it was replayed. Okay, so now Susan and I can share our computation. And if I computed something, she can take advantage of it, and vice versa, right? The cool part here is that the CI can participate in this as well, which means that every time I pull anything from the CI, like if I pull master and I run Nx run many target test --all, and I test all the projects, it will always be instant, right? Any operation on latest master should be instant because it presumably the CI agent already computed everything, tested everything, linted everything, built everything, right? And the cool part here is that if you think about how CI works, every agent is a separate machine, right? So if your agent can share the same cache, what it results in is that if you like rerun the same PR multiple times, so you merge your PR into master, you suddenly get a much faster CI runs, right? Much faster CI runs. They can go from being like on average 15, 20 minutes to just very few minutes. But NPM install becomes basically the bottleneck because your CI runs are so fast, okay? Let's summarize. Nx is a set of dev tools for monorepos. It's been around for many years, and it's used by a lot of Fortune 500 companies to drive their development. A lot of ambitious applications are built using Nx. I tried to show you a few interesting things to get you excited, right? And one of which was metadata-driven CLI. In my experience, that's the most robust CLI I've seen, at least in the front-end space, right? It allows you to have a fantastic sort of command line experience, but also helps you interact with the CLI using the editor, so you can construct commands interactively, look at forms. It comes with a virtual file system to help you do like advanced code generation things, right? All of those things matter a lot, especially when you realize that you can extend it, right? You can have your own builder and you will see the same form, same flags, same assistants. You can have your own generators that are unique to your organization, and you can compose existing generators in interesting ways to build your own generators. It's all very easy to do, and it doesn't break the dev experience. The dev experience remains just as rich because nothing there is hard-coded. That's the key part of it, right? Secondly, Nx has a lot of monorepo goodness, right? Things like computation, cache, and code change analysis allow you to scale from, having one mid-size app to many, many large applications, and it works like reasonably well, right? Computation caching, the idea here is that instead of recomputing or retesting the same things over and over again, how about we just replace the result of the last computation? And if we can share it with our teammates and our CI, well, that's great, right? That means that we'll never have to rebuild or retest the same thing twice. Code change analysis works differently. It looks at the diff between the master and your branch and figures out based on the diff what can be affected by it, right? So often code change analysis can sort of narrow down the list of projects better than computation caching. So the combination of these two tools, code change analysis and the caching, is what gives Nx this fantastic performance, right? In addition to being just improving the performance of most operations in a typical workspace, it also enables completely new flows, completely new workflows. For example, computation caching allows you to build, to do incremental builds. If you have a fantastically large application, right, that maybe takes 20 minutes to build, right, it's just unrealistic to force people to do it locally and over again. Because you have distributed computation caching, you can actually do it such that they take advantage of the build artifacts and only rebuild the bits that they are changing, right? So as a result, right, serving an app, that super large app, can take just a few seconds, or making a change can take just a few seconds. Those type of things you just cannot do without having some way of sharing computation with your teammates, okay? In addition to doing that, Nx also helps you scale your org, right? Once you have a lot of teams contributing to the same workspace, different challenges appear, right? Things like who owns what? If I have a package, can other teams depend on my lib, on my package, right? And often the answer is no, right? You want to control visibility. You want to control things like stability, right? Which packages are experimental and which not, right? And often folks rely on code reviews to do that, which is a broken idea, right? Code reviews never capture those small things because they look insignificant, right? But actually have a huge impact on your workspace. So with Nx, you can define set of rules, and those type of things will be statically enforced, which is a big deal. Finally, you can move other parts of the stack into the monorepo, like the backend, the APIs, your Next.js apps, etc. So you can share code not just within your application, right, but between your apps, between your stacks, between your teams, right? And that's where Nx really shines. If you think it's interesting, go to nx.dev/react, try the tutorial, check it out, and let me know what you think. Thank you.